Sophia Gebra-Wiet. Gebra-Ewit. Sophia Gebra-Ewit from Mayor Scott's office, and Matt Stegman on behalf of Council President Nick Mosby. Also been joined by Councilwoman Odette Ramos, 14th District. Director Ryer, I believe you have a presentation for us.
I
and
do.
How long is that approximately?
Oh, at least a half an hour.
Okay, yeah, let's keep it under 45 minutes, and then we'll get into questions and answers. Before you begin, please introduce who you have from your team, name and position, please.
Sure, I'd like to introduce Sarah Parnellum, the head of data and policy analysis.
Oh, and you need the mic, sir.
Thank you. Sarah Parnellum, Director of Policy and Data Analysis, Kristen Ahern, and John Lloyd from the Department of Planning. Shall I start?
Take it away.
Okay. So the chairman is also a member of the Planning Commission and asked us to make a presentation similar to that we do before the Planning Commission. So I'm going to give you sort of the whole cycle and the whole background before we get to that. This first page is really talking about the very big picture. But essentially what I'm trying to show here is that as you're going to see throughout this presentation, the capital budget does not relate to the capital needs of the city. It relates to what we can afford. So you're going to see a big disparity that I'm going to point out during this presentation between the needs and the ability. Now the process is that it's a 6-year process. By the way, the charter asked the Planning Commission to manage and oversee the capital budget. It relates to the physical planning of the city. So we do that in 6-year chunks. Only the first year is incorporated into the budget. Only the first year is legal, so to speak, power of law. The next 5 are for planning purposes. So every year we advance a year, but only the budget year is in law. Definition of a capital project in Baltimore, over $50,000. Yes, over $50,000. It's a physical betterment or improvement, related studies and related A&E associated with the physical improvement. It's not vehicles, it's not laptops, it's not repairs or maintenance of less than $100,000 or an emergency measure. And it's typically not salaries, except those are closely associated with the capital projects. Types of projects, I'm sure you know all this, long list of bridges, roads, rec centers, all our utilities, our schools and libraries, the many, many, many city-owned buildings we have, including the downtown campus, police and fire stations, senior centers, health clinics, even the convention center. So it's a wide number of projects, municipal markets. Now, this slide is trying to show you the cycle of the capital budget. It's a little complicated, so I'm going to explain it, but essentially, the cycle begins in September. In September, the planning department works with the finance department to begin to determine how much money we have. Now, that number changes throughout the year, but at the beginning of September, shall we say, we know we have what we have from general obligation bonds and some other fund source. There's another, I'll come back to that in a minute. So we send out in September a target letter to the agencies, essentially saying, this is what we think we can afford this year, and this is your share of that. And they work with that sort of allocation. It's a range, a low and high range, and they respond typically around Thanksgiving of the year, with their priorities, what they think they need to do in order of priority to do their job. And we have a month or two to winnow the high end of that down to what we know we can afford in the upcoming budget year. So that's the top right-hand box. Then in January, we go public. And so we have extensive presentations to the Planning Commission, the full commission. And that you're seeing part of that today. And if you watch that on Channel 25 or whatever, some of this will look familiar. So then the Planning Commission hears what the agency will, I'll start this way. Two of the agencies start with an image of the Titanic. And there's a reason for that. You'll see in a minute that they're overwhelmed by their capital needs, and they're trying very hard to make priorities in a difficult situation. So after all those presentations, the staff of this department tries to winnow those priorities down to what we can afford. And in March, the Planning Commission, this again their charter role, votes on that capital budget. Then between March and the end of June, it goes to the Board of Finance, the Board of Estimates, and then to you all. So that's a complete cycle, and starting September, it starts all over again. So I want to reiterate that the planning department does not initiate projects. Finance department does not initiate projects. The 8 agencies that participate in the capital budget initiate the projects. All right, and this should actually be much more dramatic than it is. The potential project list on the left would be much bigger, and the recommended is much smaller. And I'm going to try to give you a sense of that ratio in this presentation. So how do we in the planning department, as opposed to the agencies, what kind of criteria do we use to evaluate these things? So this is kind of a moving target. We try to get better at it every year. But what we've done in recent years is create a CIP oversight committee, which is made up of the other agencies. People always ask, why doesn't the left hand talk to the right hand? Well, this is an attempt to do that, so that we don't pave a street and then dig it up for a new water line. That's kind of the idea. So we have the people in each agency that participate in that agency capital budget. They do a scoring and a ranking of the capital budget. So that's a relatively new piece. But these are some of the criteria on your screen are what we as a staff use. So first one is something required by law, right? Federal, state law, regulation. And then we have, in no particular order, and we talk about this a lot within the planning department. Who benefits from the project? Is it a historically disadvantaged community? Is there an immediate or long-term safety or health benefit? The condition of the asset, and I'll come back to that in a minute. The return on the revenue, in other words, will it grow the pot a little bit so we all have an easier time next year? The environmental impact, will it affect water quality or greenhouse gas emissions? And then the efficiency and effectiveness, is it money well spent? Are they dotting their I's and crossing their T's when they submit a project? And then these are some of the other things that come up. It's a complicated, difficult process. I don't know how else to say that. And now I'm going to show you the scale of the problem. Essentially, in the middle column, well, on your left-hand side are 6 of the biggest participants in the capital budgets, the agencies with the biggest participants in it. And in the middle is what they have estimated they need to take care of their capital needs. So note that it's almost $8 billion, that's with the B, not an M. And then if you analyze that to roughly 5-6% a year to maintain an asset or invest in it every 20 years, our capital budget should look like the 463 at the bottom of the right-hand column, and that's an estimate from the agencies of what they need. They think they need to do their job. All right, so that's what they think they need to do their job. I'm going to start with Department of General Services. Department of General Services manages not all, but most of our real estate portfolio. It's our buildings. It's our, what we call vertical assets. It's not our horizontal assets. It's not roads, utilities, maintenance yards, those kinds of things. It's our buildings, our vertical assets. So they've done a very good job of assessing the condition of our buildings. And they use this tool called an FCI score, Facility Condition Index. And that tool is the ratio between deferred maintenance, which you saw on the previous slide, and the replacement cost of the asset. So there's a ratio for this building. There's a ratio for the Woolman building and the Benton building and the Cummings building and the downtown campus. So the numerator on the top is the catch-up cost, and the denominator is the reproduction cost, right? And so there on the right is your score. I'm going to show you the next slide. So in an FCI ranking, and remember this is, every city's doing this. It's not just us. We haven't invented something here. This is the pyramid about the condition of your real estate assets, your real estate portfolio. And if you look on the right from the previous page, the Baltimore City FCI score is 0.52. In that pyramid, that is a cell level. That is cell. That means that you're almost, that the ratio between your deferred maintenance and the replacement cost is at half. In other words, you are halfway through this building, and if you don't change the game, this building is going to fail. Show you that. This tells you when it's going to fail. It's going to fail roughly in 2039 or 2040. That's not that far. It's less than 20 years away. So the current column in the sort of reddish, most red color is showing what we are spending now in the capital budget. Again, this is our real estate assets. This is what the city owns. If we wanted to get it up to one level in the pyramid, if we wanted to get it up to the critical level in this, we would have to spend, the middle column would apply. We would have to spend $70 million a year to get the FCI score from 52 to 42. And then if we wanted to get it up to poor condition, which is where most cities are not in good shape on this, then we would have to spend almost $80 million a year just in Department of General Services on our vertical real estate portfolio. So we're looking at a failure in roughly 2038, 2039, maybe 2040, of the value of our real estate portfolio will be less than the cost of replacing it. So that's our critical. I have a second one here. This is going to be hard to read, but this is a breakdown of the square footage of the vertical assets by agency. Now, as you may or may not know, DGS maintains most of these, but Board of Elections, you know, who would have thought of that? But there are police stations in here, there are fire stations, there are community action centers. The courthouse, actually 2 courthouses are gigantic real estate assets and liabilities. The utilities don't tend to be in here, but the Bureau of Solid Waste is. The Bureau of Solid Waste is part of DPW, but does not benefit from the water and wastewater and stormwater utility funds. They are, solid waste is funded out of the general funds. So I do want to take your attention to the very bottom here. You'll see 2 lines. One, this is capital and operating budget. So capital budget for this item is roughly, give or take, $10 million a year. Some years it might be 12. Some years maybe a little bit more. And the operating budget is again, for DGS, 39 million. And then scroll over to the right-hand column. And this is giving you a sense of how much square footage we can maintain with these dollars. And you see we're doing okay on the operating budget, but we are miserably failing on the capital budget. We have roughly, we'll say give or take, this is a hard thing to measure, 4 million square feet of real estate. I know that's a lot. And we only have the capital to maintain 700,000. So the point of all of this, which I think the chair has seen at the Planning Commission, is that we'll never catch up. We have to divest of ourselves of real estate, and probably a lot of real estate. We cannot maintain what we have. And when I finish this presentation, you'll see that if we shifted the entire capital budget to DGS, which means we wouldn't fund the other 7 agencies, then we might be able to do it, but we have lots of other needs in the city of Baltimore. So now I'm going to get into the budget itself. This is showing trends. Let's see, Mr. Centimini's gone, but this was a good year. Believe it or not, this was a good year. The right-hand bar is this year. The total capital budget, 793. That sounds like a lot, but I'm going to come back to that later. The big orange bar in the middle of that are utility funds, which can't be spent on anything else. They can only be spent on...
Director, can you hang on one second?
Yeah.
Nina, or Sophia, do we have an electronic version of this presentation? Or, sorry, Kristen, do you have it? Can you email that to me right now so I can send it out to my colleagues? All right, we're good. Thank you.
Okay. I think we're on page 17 here. So I was pointing out in this, the different revenue sources. The orange, the largest one, is a dedicated fund. Can't spend it on roads or technology or roofs or schools or anything but water, wastewater, and stormwater. The general, this is going to be really hard to see. What I want to point out with this bar chart, I think, is the bottom 3, and maybe most specifically the bottom 2, the maroon and the blue, city bond funds and city general funds. This is the flexible money in the capital budget. The rest of it's not flexible. If it's a state-funded thing, it goes to a state thing. If it's a water-funded thing, it goes to a water-related use. We have to prioritize our money to fill the gaps where nobody else will pay for something. So I really wanted to show the scale here between what we really control, which are maybe the bottom, maybe transportation revenue bonds, HUR, city general funds, and city bond funds are what we really control. Transportation funds can't be switched out of transportation, typically, not exclusively. So I just wanted to give you a sense of that. Here's the bar chart. This is sources, okay? Sources revenues, this is source side. So the revenue loans and the county grants the revenue loans are your water bills, right? Rain tax, water bill, what have you. And the county grants are the county's contribution to the water and wastewater system. So it's not, we can't spend that county money on the JFX, for example. And again, you see the amounts we control: general funds, HUR, and bond funds. I do want to, oh, Bob's back here. So one of the reasons why this was a good year, several reasons, was that the finance department was able to make available a substantial amount of money, $77 million in this case, of general funds. So that's from the operating budget, right? So I think it's fair to say it's considered to be good fiscal policy not to fund all your capital needs from debt. You fund some of it from operating funds, and they're doing that this year. Now, it's challenging. When Kerwin was coming and peaking and were staring down our throat, that became a scary thing. But this year, we were able to do it. I think Mr. Sinema would be the first to say he doesn't know if he can do that next year. And this shows you the trends. So you see the red is city bond funds. Let me explain how that is set. Department of Finance does a financial analysis every 5 years that essentially tells us how much we can afford to borrow. So whether it's from the general funds, I know it's confusing, whether it's from general funds or bond funds, it's coming out of the operating budget, right? It's still, you still got to cut something in the operating budget, whether you're paying directly for capital projects or whether you're paying debt for capital projects. You're still paying for it. So every 5 years we evaluate this. 5 years ago, we raised the bond fund limit from 65 million to 80 million, and I believe next year we will go through that process again. And then on this one, you can see that the city general funds, the 77, the blue, was very large this year, and that's what pushed that bar up to 186. And then one final thing, this happens this year. Every 2 years, we go to the voters of the citizens of Baltimore for what's called the bond authorization. We, by charter, we need the approval of voters to go into debt. I'll come back to that in a couple of minutes. But we organize that debt essentially into 4 big buckets, and those are the buckets on the right. Community and economic development loans essentially are funding HCD and BDC, I would guess, in general. The affordable housing loan it's kind of part of, well, it used to be part of the community and economic development loan. Now it's a separate item, but it's essentially the trust fund that HCD operates. Recreation and park and public facility. That's a little, maybe we're not being completely transparent because that's a lot of stuff. That's all the public buildings that I was talking about earlier is in that $36 million figure. It's all the rec and parks. I'm going to go into this down the road, but it's a lot of property that we maintain. And then the school loan is frozen by the negotiations between the city and the state and the school system years ago at $19 million. All right, so now we're going to actually get into the budget. So this list is by agency in descending order. So at the top, sort of cross that off your mind because we can't do really anything about it. I'm going to try to show you how it's spent, but it's very technical. It's a lot of pumps and pipes and widgets and things like that. It is the biggest part of the capital budget, but it's also the most technical, and it transcends the city's boundaries. Department of Transportation is next. Again, you'll see they have several different sources of funding. Our general fund back sources, in this case, is $34 million, and total is 129. I'm going to come back to that detail. Then comes HCD, general services we've talked about a little bit. Rec and Park, this year we're going to talk a lot about the huge influx of state money into the Department of Recreation and Parks. You'll see our contribution this year is only $7 million, but the state contributed almost 60. Department of Public Works Solid Waste. I do want to talk about that because it is not funded by the utilities, and it's in Public Works, but it's not funded by the utilities. And this is where we have tremendous liabilities. We have a landfill that is almost full, and an incinerator that we want to shut down, as well as their ongoing other operating expenses. Many of you remember during COVID, at one point, 50% of their workforce was out sick. And if you drive around, which I did with Director Mitchell, and look at their facilities, their locker rooms and showers and things like that, it's pretty obvious why 50% of their folks were sick. So we are running our Bureau of Solid Waste out of facilities that were built in the 50s. I don't know the exact percentage of their workforce that's female, but there are no female locker rooms, no female shower, nothing. And most of the yards are almost undersized to even add this stuff. We're going to try to figure out how to add this, but we did try to provide a down payment to them this year to catch up on that. Public schools, again, I talked earlier about this. This amount is fixed. The state contributes a little bit more than this, I think about $30 million. You're going to see their needs too. Their needs we're basically funding about 10% of their needs. These are our most vulnerable population, and you'll hear from a lot of jurisdictions that Baltimore City doesn't support its schools enough. You will also see, for example, Montgomery County, I believe their capital budget for schools is roughly equal to our entire capital budget. So there's a huge disparity between what the city can do and some of the wealthier jurisdictions. And then the bottom are some of the smaller ones, mayoralty and planning, or some cultural things and a couple extra things from the state this year. A library gets a sort of carve out for roughly $3 million from DGS a year, but they also supplement that with a lot of private fundraising. Development Corporation, similar. And then BSET is in the capital budget. Technology is not always a sort of eligible use, so we tend to fund that out of general funds, not debt. We don't fund that out of debt. So the idea is that whatever you're funding with debt should last as long as the debt. So if it's supported by a 20-year bond, then it's going to last 20 years. A laptop or an automobile doesn't last for 20 years. So that should all add up to the previous number of $793 million. So going to agency by agency here, if you want me to hurry up, tell me. This is Public Works. Again, the three big utilities are water, wastewater, and stormwater. It's all about water. Again, half the capital budget are these items. You can't move money out of these items into transportation or general services or schools or anything like that. It's funded separately, and there's a firewall between them. This is their fund sources, showing you basically that the water bill is the revenue loan, essentially. The water bills support that, and the county grants support that version in Baltimore County. Transportation, the second largest one now. So this gives you a sense of the scale of their responsibilities. So let's start with the ADA issue. There is a group that's challenging the city on that, so Department of Transportation has put together a team to work on this, and they have come up with this number, $650 million to get the city of Baltimore into compliance with the ADA regulation. Now that, I believe that passed in 1973. We are the oldest city in the jurisdiction of Maryland. We have the oldest infrastructure. 99% of it was built before 1973. So the scale of this is massive. We'll show you in a minute how we're starting to try to address that. Bridges are the next important, because when they fall down, that's really bad. And they're very expensive. Bridges are typically paid for by federal funds. That's how we prioritize our federal funds. But every dollar of federal money requires a 20% match. And sometimes we struggle with that. I'm going to come back to that to show what we're doing around that. Roadways, facilities, signals, transit infrastructure, all the way down to bicycle facilities at several million. So the estimated deferred maintenance, going back to that early slide, is $1.3 billion, or we should be spending roughly $158 million a year. That's the number, like that's the goal, to get to $158 million to take care of our city. And we haven't had that number since the Great Recession. We haven't even been close. We're starting to get it back, but we haven't been close for over 10 years. So the transportation of the city, it's basically maintained by the operating budget, which means it's patched. It's not fixed, it's patched. And it's been patched for 10 years, and that's why you look out your window and things look like they're falling apart sometimes. So they are, and they are because this funding has been down for an extended period of time. This part, I want to note, this does not include major projects like the Highway to Nowhere, the Hanover Street Bridge, Druid Park Lake Drive, those kinds of new projects that we make. It also doesn't include the infrastructure for the Park Heights major redevelopment area, or even the infrastructure for the Uplands project. This is one reason why the Uplands project has been going so slow over the years. Haven't had this money. So this is a breakdown of this year's appropriation. Oh, here we go. So again, in sort of rank order, at the top, bike and pedestrian improvements. So you'll see down the road the big investment in ADA.
Director, you have a 71-slide presentation?
Oh, what?
You have a 71-slide presentation, is that correct?
That's correct.
And you're on slide 29?
Yes, that's correct.
And we are about 30 minutes in?
That's correct.
So that means you have about 15 minutes to complete the remaining 42 slides? Just want to
Thank you, sir.
doing a time check.
All right, transportation. This is the fund source of transportation. I just want to briefly, you can come back and look at this, but our general obligation, we pushed that up this year because we're getting, you hear about the Federal Infrastructure Act, et cetera, we're getting more federal money. We got to match it. So we have to up that number just to get sort of what we're owed by the federal government. So that $40 million is higher, but we've got to rise up to that. State funds, there is a dedicated fund within this to the I-83 speed camera revenue, has to go to I-83. Conduit funds are also a dedicated fund within the Department of Transportation. Hcd, I don't even know where to start with this, but you can see their liability is in the B's, also roughly $3 billion. This is a breakdown in some of the main categories: affordable housing, home repairs, demos, stabilization, our impact investment areas, and our major project I just referenced, Park Heights, Chum, Uplands, that have infrastructure issues that we have to redevelop those projects. And here's a breakdown of this year's appropriation between affordable housing, their major projects, other. I do want to say you are going to be hearing, if you haven't already, the Arpa presentation with, we really tried to coordinate this as much as possible with them, and I think you'll see a fair amount of synergy, especially in this budget, where we were able to pay for things that we couldn't pay for out of the capital budget with some ARPA funds. This is their breakdown. Only a part of their budget actually comes from this city. They get a fair amount of money from HUD. I talked a lot about general services, but this gives you some numbers. 128 buildings, nearly 5 million square feet. So that's a million square feet is 3 20-story office buildings, just to give you a sense of how much real estate we have. A $2 billion replacement cost. These are the types of facilities: fire, public safety, police are all, this is again by rank order. The appropriation this year, we're going to come back to this with a big chunk of money coming from 2 sources, one local, one state, into public safety buildings. But again, even the convention center is in this budget. Fund sources, again, you'll see the big $20 million number in the state. That's unusual. And as I might have said earlier, with the Department of Solid Waste, we prioritized extra general funds this year into this category, the Department of General Services. Rec and Park, huge inventory, 52 rec centers, acres and acres of parks, all kinds of other facilities, basketball courts, tennis courts, pools, playgrounds, a couple of skate parks, dog parks, you name it. I think you all know this. This is their budget, though. It's unusually large. It's almost $60 million a year. This is how they are basically spreading it out. And look at this number. This is where it's from. It's $7 million in obligation funds, almost $43 million from the state. So this allows them to, remember, we do a 6-year capital budget, so there's always a backlog. We're always ready when there's more money. We know where it should go. So they have a backlog that they can begin to address with this state money this year. This is solid waste. I can't emphasize enough the heavy lift that the Bureau of Solid Waste has to shift from an incinerator landfill system to a more environmentally benign system. So they have to build a rail transfer. First of all, they have to expand the landfill just to stay alive, basically. Then they have to build a transfer station because at some point in 2042, I think the landfill, even the expanded landfill, fills up. We have to create the different kinds of transfer stations that move the solid waste around. We have to begin our program of reducing the amount of solid waste, whether it be through MRFs, compost, recycling construction debris, recycling household debris, et cetera, et cetera. And I mentioned the aging yards and service centers earlier. This is the breakdown of how they're spending their money this year. Unfortunately, we have MDE violations that amount to over $3 million. So just to stay within the law, we have to spend $3 million. We have a set aside for the future landfill expansion, which I think Director Mitchell said when he got here that Oakland, California's landfill would last another 150 years, and ours will last, I think, 7, maybe 25 once we expand it. So we're in trouble. We're in trouble there. Again, this is the fund sources. Again, see the big injection of general funds this year. That went primarily to the yards, the maintenance yards. Schools. Again, this is fairly fixed. I would note she's not here today, but the planning department hired the director of planning and real estate for the school system as assistant director Nicole Stewart. So we now have a real good insight on the school system capital budget, but I'm going to skip over that for today unless people have questions. again, system. In general, the city's portion goes towards, it doesn't go through reconstructing one school. It gets spread out. All the air conditioning that you see we've been doing, I think we're in the last year of that. The systemic improvements get paid for out of the city money. Again, you saw that also reflected in the voter authorization column. This money typically goes towards small cultural things right across the street. Here's an example. The Peel is just about to reopen. But this year we had some injection of state money. So you may have heard from, I forget the name of the office, but the mayor's office, we're prioritizing broadband in the public housing sites because they're geographically confined, and there's high equity and high need issue. So we're putting a chunk of money towards starting that. There's also state money specifically for Penn Station redevelopment that's essentially passing through this. And then there's our $1 million that we spend a year on cultural facilities. That reflects the sources. Again, library, again, we set aside $3 million a year, but they raise another 5 or 6 on that. See, I am almost done. Baltimore Development Corporation does not have a large capital budget. They've been putting out a lot of money to support neighborhood businesses. Lately, they're winding down Lexington Market. They're starting up the Avenue Market. They support the Main Street program. That's a breakdown of how they spend it. That's the revenue source. BSIT, they did this. This was a example to try to explain their money. So they use an airport analogy to sort of get you a sense of the airport and the gates and getting to the gates and all that. That's how to understand how they spend their money. But again, much of it is actually not capital in nature, and we pay for it out of general funds provided by the Department of Finance because they don't last the 20-year. All right, I'm trying to get through this now. Our equity analysis. Now, this is something actually you all know that we've been working on for 3 or 4 years. We started our departmental work in 2015. We used the Urban Sustainability Director's lens. Right? There's 4 pieces to it: structural, procedural, distributional, and transgenerational. This is the best example of transgenerational equity that you will see. Right? We are asking our children to pay for us today, right? When we sell a bond for 20 years, our children are paying off that bond, and we're spending the money now. So this is really a great example of transgenerational equity. This is our latest analysis, and I believe we have a link to this year's analysis on our website. I'm just trying to show 2 examples here. We're at the very end, but on the left-hand side is our mapping of the capital budget, including DPW. And I would argue that that's really not an accurate picture because it includes all these utilities. So we present the right-hand map also, which is a map of the capital budget without the DPW utilities. And you can, if you go to our website, you'll see a more detailed analysis of this now. And then I can't even see that. These are examples of 2 bar charts. This one is percent of residents Black or African American FY 18 through 23. So this is our 5th year we've been doing this. You can see that, and then the next one is by household income. I think the top level is over 60,000 and the bottom is below 35. And that's the end of my presentation.
Director, thank you so much. I was reminded that we had actually originally said 90 minutes for the presentation, so I apologize for the change in time, but thank you. I think got a good opportunity to have a good discussion, and we'll go back to whichever slide we're on, and we can drill down in a little more detail based on committee members' interest. We'll start off with Councilman Schleifer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director Ryer, on one of the slides you said we have $1.3 billion of deferred maintenance that needs to be done. How much of that is getting solved by the $641 million of ARPA money? Can you use your microphone so that they can hear you?
I can't answer that because many of those decisions have not been made yet. The system is closed. You can't submit a new application at this point, but they're in the process of, as you hopefully know, they're reviewing them for eligibility. First of all, so you have the sieve of what's eligible for ARPA money in this category, and that's a challenge. For example, you might say that an HVAC system on Woolman Building, because of COVID, would be an eligible activity. You couldn't open the building because the HVAC system couldn't maintain a safe environment. And that would be true. But to replace the HVAC system, you might have to replace the roof. And that would not be ineligible. So there's been a lot of talk about what's eligible and what's not eligible, and I don't know where they are right now.
Okay, so I assume you didn't have an opportunity to watch the previous hearings of today on Trump TV, but what we learned earlier today was that I think it was in the neighborhood of $450 to $500 million of ARPA money has already been allocated to specific things. So just to clarify, money has already been allocated, and that the administration's priority is also focused on capital projects. So, I mean, you laid out pretty clearly here the $1.3 billion, and I like the line items showing us, where each of those things are. And I agree, sidewalks are very important and some of these other things, but can I make that a budget request, Chairman, that we get a list of, based on that slide on this presentation, the $1.3 billion, how much ARPA money is going towards items that were on those slides, and to which items?
Well, I can answer part of that. If it's in the capital budget, there's no ARPA money in the capital budget. It's an entirely separate budget. So what we tried to do, somewhat successfully, but not totally, is where ARPA would not pay for something. Again, the general funds and general obligation bonds are our most valuable money. That's the only real money we control as a city. So if somebody else wouldn't pay for it and it had to be done, then we would try to target general fund or general obligation bond money to it. So,
it doesn't matter to me what's not covered. I just simply want to know, based on that slide, of the $1.3 billion of deferred maintenance and stuff that needs to get done in the city, how much per item that's on those items is going to be coming from ARPA money? That's all. It's just a budget request. You guys can get back to us on this when you follow up, but it's just a pretty simple request. And my next question on the same topic.
Councilman, hang on.
Just offhand, there was, I think, $41 million for Rec and Parks facility improvements out of ARPA. There was also that $100 million award of housing. We'd have to look at the project by project, but some of that would have been is capital related or would have needed capital funds to finish the project. Those are the two I can remember. There might be something else I'm forgetting, but I think those are the two big chunks.
So can we get, I think that's a pretty quick request, but basically an outline of what's in the CIP that's ARPA funded, right?
Yeah, we can follow up on that.
Yeah. Okay.
Nina, Nate, you guys are good?
And on that same topic, so how much did you, as planning director, request of ARPA funds towards projects, and what item was your top priority?
We did not, the planning department did not submit capital requests to ARPA.
Okay.
If you remember the beginning of the presentation, I presented the cycle, the fiscal cycle of the capital budget. So we were unfortunately at least 2 or 3 months ahead of the ARPA office in our cycle. So we were trying to make as many decisions as we could to backfill as many non-ARPA eligible projects as we could. The example I can give of this is the Department of Solid Waste. Their facilities, their locker rooms and HVAC systems and things like that. We heard early on from the ARPA office, we thought they would be eligible, but they were not. So we prioritized those out of the capital budget.
Okay, and so, I mean, you're outlining what the council has actually brought up multiple times, is that there's clearly a lot of synergy between the functions of the planning department and the functions of, you know, the newly created ARPA office, right? You guys are both looking to the future, figuring out what's the best use of funding, how to apply that, and clearly you guys, you know, have been doing this for a while, and you have long-term plans, which we'll get to at some point. But do you think your team would be able to handle managing that $641 million with the expertise that you have on your team?
Well, our team is Kristen and John. Do you guys, can you handle 640? No, we're not the finance department. We don't have analysts on our staff. It's just, this is it right here. We
You have
do the
3
budget, we
people in the
don't
planning
monitor
department?
the budget. We don't manage the budget. We just do the budget. That,
So your team could not handle managing the money?
I don't think so.
No, okay. And my second question, do you think it's acceptable to give public funds to organizations that are not in good standing with the state?
I don't know anything about that.
What's that?
I have to defer to a state person, I think, for that. I don't know what their rules are.
Well, I mean, the planning department oversees some of the spending plans and stuff.
I think,
So if an organization or a program is not in good standing, do you guys check that before you make recommendations to the mayor's office to give money to specific groups?
yeah, we check that on that. The cultural funds are something we distribute, that it's only $1 million a year, but I believe they have to be in good standing.
And what about with the video lottery terminal funds, the slots funds? Do they have to be in good standing?
Yeah, at the contract.
They have to be?
Yeah.
And so do you guys make any recommendations to the mayor's office to provide funding to organizations that are not in good standing?
I don't know the answer to that because I'm not that sure of how good standing works. My nonprofit days, there were multiple reasons for that good standing certification, which could range from very minor to major. So if it's a minor item, like you forgot to file something, then it can be remedied pretty simply. So you'd have to look at that on a case-by-case basis.
So you're either in good standing or you're not. So I guess the answer is then yes, you would make a recommendation to the mayor that he approve funding to an organization that's not in good standing with the state, if the reason they're not in good standing is something minor.
That would make sense to me, but
Okay, so that's very troubling, and I would hope that that policy would be revisited, that we wouldn't be spending public funds going to organizations that are not in good standing with the state. There's a reason why, you know, nonprofits are nonprofits. They do a lot of good, and there's certain requirements that they file with the IRS and others. And so the public needs to have confidence that the funds are going to the places that it should be, and the main way you can support that is by, you know, looking up their 990s and such. And so I would hope that the planning department would revisit this case-by-case policy and would not recommend to the mayor or any agency that they give money to nonprofits that do not follow what needs to be followed in order to be considered a registered nonprofit.
Councilman, is the example you're referring to ARPA related?
No, PCDA video lottery terminal funds related.
So,
Those are in the operating budget
So-
typically.
so who's responsible? Let me redirect this question to I think the CAO and the budget director. Who's responsible for ensuring that funds dispersed are going to organizations like CBOs that are in good standing with the state? I wouldn't even know where to begin. I'm just
Yeah, I'll need to follow up. I'm not sure offhand if there's a check in place to do that. Yeah, I'll need to follow up with finance director to see if he can guide us.
What about the PCDA money? Who's in charge of that?
Well, you mean the casino?
It's us.
Yeah, that's the planning department.
Horseshoe was mayor's office.
Right. So, I guess the question is, if the specific so in the instance that the councilman is raising, which is PCDA funds, who's in charge of ensuring compliance?
So, to defer to Bob, if it's an operating budget, it would go into the city's operating budget. If it's a capital project, the vast majority go to other city agencies. It's a transfer to another agency.
Councilman?
If it's a nonprofit, I'd have to check to get back to you on that.
Do we know if it's capital or operating?
All we know is that people apply for funds. The planning department reviews those applications and determines what they believe to be the best use of those funds. From there, they make a recommendation to the mayor, and the mayor can either approve those allocations or reject them. And so I would assume, I know the mayor assumes that, once a recommendation is being made to him by an agency, that the agency has done their due diligence. But I guess I can't even get to the specifics on that because I guess I'm a little astonished that it would depend on whether or not somebody's, what the infraction is. So we're willing to spend, from what I'm understanding, public dollars to a nonprofit that is not in good standings, essentially, therefore ruling that they're not a nonprofit anymore. So, I can't just go ahead and say, hey, I'm so-and-so nonprofit and give me money and then not do any of the paperwork associated with that to show that the money's actually going to where they say it's going. So, I think that I guess I'll follow up at a later date. It's not a budget request. This is more, I guess, just a common sense request that we get a policy in place that the planning department not put the city in a bad position like it has done in the past and continues to do as recently as this year, and suggest that we give money to, I don't know why you're smiling. There's nothing funny about it. There's money going to organizations that have never followed the requirements that they're required to do as a nonprofit. So a nonprofit, let's just say, that hasn't filed any returns or 990s in 20 years, they're no longer considered a nonprofit. So just because they have, they're using an organization name or they have some bank account open does not mean that public dollars should go to that.
So let me just clarify here. What you asked was, do we check the nonprofit status at the budget level? That's not the contractual level. That's not when we're actually spending money. That's when we're initially budgeting money. It's a very early very early step in the process.
Can I jump in, Director? I think what the councilman is saying is that I think we understand what you're saying. Like, your role in it is at the initial stages of it. I'll come to you in 1 second, Mr. Shorter. I know you've got something to add. I think we understand that your role is very early in it. I think the concern that he's raising is that you're making a recommendation for these groups to be funded, or a group, or a certain group, or whichever group, a group. And from there, it ends up going through a process that you've initiated by your own declaration a second ago. And then those groups inevitably end up becoming or getting funded, and they're not in good standing with the state. Go to CAO Shorter. Do you have something to add?
Sure. What I'd say is it is very difficult for a director to answer hypotheticals. If you have a specific question or a specific organization that you would like to get an answer to, give the name of that organization so that we can respond. There are instances where an organization is disqualified from doing business with the city because of a procurement issue. Those regulations are very formal, and I should say very specific. When dealing with granting a nonprofit or a community-based organization funds, we are not as specific. I don't know that there's code that regulates grants and grant management in that way, where an organization is disqualified. And so it is very difficult for Director Ryer to answer the question, because he doesn't, without specifics, without a specific organization or a specific sense of what not in good standing refers to. It could refer to, for example, we were providing a lot of relief dollars to community-based organizations at the start of the recovery. Let's say one of those community-based organizations had not paid last year's some fee, which moved them out of good standing with the state or with some other municipality. That was the purpose of the relief funds. So it would be very difficult for Director Ryer to say flat out that that as an organization, our government could not engage a nonprofit or provide relief dollars or grant dollars because they are not in good standing, because it's a hypothetical that it's hard to answer.
Sure, and so thank you for that, and I will. I'll certainly give you some names to work with, which I'm sure the director already knows. But yeah, certainly, like has been brought up. You know, if you didn't pay the fee or something, and the fee is a little bit late, you know, he mentioned that there would be an opportunity to cure it. My question, which I asked and I got the answer, was, would you make a recommendation to the mayor to fund an organization that's not in good standing? You know, certainly if they're not in good standing over, you know, their $300 annual filing fee, that's a pretty simple thing to cure. You go online, you pay the $300, and then, you know, a week later you're in good standing. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about actually going through the process and moving forward and funding something that still is not in good standing. And you know, he answered honestly, and I appreciate that. Chairman, do I get another question, or am I?
You still have a meeting with DPW?
I do have a meeting with DPW
Yep,
upstairs. So. All right, I got a few more, but I'll just.
But you're going to take one.
I'm going
right?
to pick.
Not a
I'm going
few.
to pick one good one. So when you started as a director of Department of Planning, you remember the first question that I asked you? All right. So I asked you. I said, like, as the planning director, who, you know, I think at the time in the past 5 years, the previous planning director had basically directed approximately $4 billion in spending. And so I said, you know, just keeping things the same, let's just say in the next 5 years, that you as the director of planning would be overseeing, you know, the spending of $4 billion. So how would you measure success? You know, $4 billion is spent in 5 years, and forgive me, I don't remember when you started. What year did you start?
19.
19. So I had said at the time, in 5 years from then, so I guess 2024, how would you know if you were successful with that $4 billion? And so now I guess, you know, we're a few years into that, more than halfway into that. And at the time, the response that you had given me was that you would be able to measure the success by by doing surveys across the city, and basically the main metric would be that people feel like the city is moving in the right direction and is funding things that are priorities to them, and the way you would find that out would be by surveying them. So I don't recall seeing a survey, and so I apologize if it's been out there, but have you guys conducted any of these citywide surveys? And if so, how many respondents have you had to them, and what do they show?
Yeah, I don't know the specifics, but it's a good question, and I'll tie this into what's called the comprehensive plan. So the city is required, and all local jurisdictions, the city and the 24 counties are required to submit to the state of Maryland a comprehensive plan after each census. And that is the foundation of our work as a planning department. So we have begun that process, and we have done some initial surveys. I think they're still open, and I don't have the results of that. But that comprehensive planning process, which forces you to think 10 years ahead, whereas the CIP is only 6 years ahead, hopefully will begin to answer that question.
So that's 10 years, so that's, $8+ billion. So you haven't conducted your own citywide survey in the past few years since you've been here to determine whether or not people feel like the planning department and the city's capital budget is moving in the right direction?
No, like I said, we're just beginning that. We're maybe 3 months into that, if that, maybe 2. So no, I don't have results of a survey to give you today.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Porter, you good? Council Vice President Middleton.
Hi, how are you?
Okay.
It's been a while. I guess this first thing, just to kind of piggyback and finish the conversation from Councilman Slifer, just for clarity, since we are, this is a public hearing. For the PCDA funding, there is clear, you have a board, it goes through a community process, and then you kind of pick and weigh the applications that come in. And I just want you to say, I'm hoping that you are reviewing these people and their applications, and if they're in good standings, and so on. That's
Yeah,
correct?
I would be extremely surprised that does not happen. It just maybe not happen at the front end of things, but at the back end, everything goes out through a contract. If it's over $25,000, it goes through the Board of Estimates. The law department reviews it. We had an alternative system, as you know, with a group called Healthy Neighborhoods for the smaller ones, and they go through their own contract process. So I feel confident by the end of the process that that question is addressed, which doesn't mean that someone cannot fall out of compliance after the contract is awarded. It's an annual certification. So there are risks involved. I will say that, especially with PCDA funds, I think we try to stick our neck out a little bit and address groups that couldn't normally access funding. We provide technical assistance to them, either directly or indirectly, to try to find the smaller groups that haven't had access to money in the past and help them develop their leadership and infrastructure to do what they want to do in their neighborhood.
Okay. So my next question, you had made a statement that we kind of must start diverting and selling real estate.
Yes.
And I guess my question will go specifically on school buildings that have been accessed over to mayor and city council, which is our responsibility. And I did kind of bring this up also with the city administrator. And Are you in the planning process when that
Yeah.
transfer happens?
Sure, let me
And is it
explain
your
that.
offices, is your
yeah.
office responsible for really trying to plan, help to plan what is going to go next in these buildings?
It's multiple agencies, and I'll explain the different roles. So this was, until recently, chaired by the Deputy Mayor for Community and Economic Development. Essentially what happens to a surplus school is it gets transferred from the school system to the Department of General Services, and you saw what their budget situation is like. They have to cut the grass and maintain the security on the building so no one breaks into it. The planning department typically oversees the community portion of that. So our community planners go out and meet with the neighborhoods and develop the sort of basic qualifications around the sale of that. Essentially, what we're asking people is, what do you not want to see this year, right? And get the temperature of the neighborhood as to what the city would be offered for. And properties are all already zoned, typically residential. They're zoned for residential use because there are schools in a residential neighborhood. Then it goes to the Department of Housing and Community Development, their division, their land disposition division, Teresa Stevens and Kate Edwards, and they actually they have a two-stage process. In the spring, they do something called an expression of interest, which is sort of an RFP light, where the developer just has to give a general concept. The idea is to cast a really wide net. And then in the fall, they issue an RFP, which is highly detailed, takes a lot of time and money, part of the developers, to actually award the property. So it's really goes to DGS, then to planning, then to HCD for disposition. And it's a great question. They're really challenging. We've got 3 new schools this year we didn't expect we were getting. A couple got deferred until next year. But it's a lot, and we're proud of our ability to support the school system. As you see, we only give them $19 million a year. But we think we can do the best job. I will say HCD has broadened the net. They have employed CoStar and LoopNet and other national advertising venues to try to bring more people in. I've had some really interesting conversations with BOPA about arts-related uses, because that works in a residential setting often. So I think we're getting better, and the number have been awarded, but it's a heavy lift.
Yeah, there definitely seems to be some flaws in that process, and the Green Spring KIP is a good example of those flaws, because its building has been trying to work through the sale of someone that has been sticking with the process for the last 3 years, and they still have not come to that final stage of the Board of Estimates. There was lack in city participation in the community process. That process I had to do. So there seems to be a lot of flaws with the school buildings and keeping that process moving, and that weight should not be carried on the council person. So just kind of sharing that with you. And then my last question, in a number of historical preservation communities, there seems to be a number of flippers that are buying and renovating homes and not being caught by the historical preservation office, and they're being now, when the person buys that home and didn't know that repairs and things were not legal because of the historical preservation, and they're caught in the middle between the community and getting fined, and this seems to be happening. I don't know if there needs to be some more employees working as inspectors, or...
Yeah, good question. Yeah, this is something we wrestle with. So I think what you're asking is, is probably a tax credit related question. If they're getting the tax credit, are they doing the work that the tax credit requires? The tax credit typically involves a higher standard of work to meet the preservation goals and guidelines.
Part of this are permits, they're doing things
Right.
to the homes.
So
that
I
they
will
should-
say that so the tax credit program lives in the CHAP in the Department of Planning, but we do not have a dedicated CHAP inspector. So we're relying on the HCD inspectors.
Oh, that's a big.
And they're really, I think I would say if Jason Hessler was here, like they're not really, they're about the building code. So getting them to enforce the CHAP regulations, getting them trained in that, and then getting them to take on that additional burden. We have the same problem with PUDs and forest conservation also. If we have, and maybe when the budget gets better, we'll submit an enhancement. We've talked about adding an inspector specifically for the programs that the planning department manages above and beyond the building code, which are PUDs, forest conservation, critical area, and CHAP.
So Administrator Shorter, you hear there, we need a CHAP inspector.
Sorry about that.
Because it seems to be, I have several areas in my district that have become problematic because of flippers, and I see some other colleagues shaking their heads that might want to weigh in, but I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director, when an agency has a capital need, they come to you to start the process?
Correct. They submit, we give them a range.
No. That's perfect. I don't mean to cut you off. I just want to get to the
Yeah.
point. If you guys know about a capital need that an agency has, do you all ever initiate the process? Or do you engage in a conversation with them saying, hey, Director X of Y agency, instead of building a shiny new tower, you should go fix this critical component
That's a
thing?
very good question. So only in extreme cases would our target letter to an agency say, we want you to address this issue.
Tell me what a target letter is, please.
Okay, in September, there are 8 agencies that participate in the capital budget, right? So we have to say we're at the beginning of the process, we know we have maybe $100 million. Let's just pull a number out. So we tell the 8 agencies, you can apply for between $5 and $15 million worth. That's your cut of the capital budget.
It's just their annual reminder, like, hey, okay, got it. So agencies make the request. It is usually rare, but if you know of something that's a very severe need that they haven't requested, you would bring that to their attention.
Yes.
And the annual process, I don't want to say starts, because capital budgeting is a year-round thing. The process kind of resets in September, if you will. Okay. Are you familiar with the condition of the impound lot on Pulaski Highway?
I am aware that a large portion of it is in the floodplain.
I see one of your staffers shaking their head.
Mr. Lloyd and I have been working ourselves personally on this particular issue with the Department of Transportation.
Have you physically been there?
No, I haven't.
You may consider making a visit there.
Uh-huh.
It is my understanding that employees have been working out of either city-owned vehicles or their own vehicles.
I mean, we heard something to that effect about one of the buildings there when we met with the Director of Operations for Transportation to essentially.
Who's that?
What's the gentleman's name?
Tavon Braxton?
I mean, that guy's kind of on his own trying to fix that, and we come from the perspective of we got to reduce our inventory, and we manage the flood office too, in the Office of Sustainability. So they have 2 yards that are either in the floodplain or the floodway.
So my understanding was that code enforcement would not permit improvements to that facility because it's in the floodplain. Is that correct?
It is my understanding that it is.
Mike, can you grab the mic, sir? Thank you.
It is my understanding that it is in the floodplain or flood path, and therefore there are restrictions on what can be done. In order to improve that lot would probably be substantially more than the city would be willing to put into that location. To that end, we've been working with the real estate office to kind of identify a new location, but right now they need about 19 acres, so that's a difficult task to ask right now, but we are working to try to locate that facility.
So I'm certain that there is far more nuance and detail to this issue.
Yes.
And I have brought this to the attention. I know the budget director and the CAO and the government relations folks were copied on my letter to Department of Transportation in advance of these hearings. But I will just say this. In my mind, and again, I recognize there is much more nuance and detail here. We have a city facility that is clearly unsafe for our employees, in which our employees are working either in city vehicles or their own personal vehicles, and we are unable to make improvements to that facility because our own code enforcement office will not approve permits to do the work necessary to make the facility safe because the Department of Planning has designated this as part of the floodplain. So there are additional rules or whatever. And I know what
it's
you're about to
FEMA.
say
No, it's
about
FEMA
FEMA. I
designated.
understand. I just want you to understand from my perspective. I know you don't have a choice on where that floodplain, but you play a role in this.
Yeah.
How ridiculous that story sounds. And then we have $641 million in Arpa funding, and we haven't figured out how to use $40,000 to build a mobile construction trailer for our employees at this location. So I just want to kind of frame from where I'm sitting how absurd that story sounds.
Actually, we were under the impression that they were using mobile trailers now.
I certainly hope that is the case.
Yeah,
We'll go out there.
We'll get it.
Okay. Are you familiar with this?
I am familiar with it, and they are using mobile trailers. That is not to say that those mobile trailers are in good condition. This is the case for DPW as well. So we are using ARPA dollars to do just that, to replace and repair where appropriate the mobile what should be temporary mobile units. This is not a permanent solution, and I'm not saying that to say that it is, suggest that it is. We have to find a more permanent solution for this operation. And I think that's what the director is suggesting, that ultimately the longer term plan has to be a plan that does not include this parcel of property. It is in the floodplain, and we know it, and we're restricted from doing any improvements.
Understood, appreciated. Again, I just hope that we're using ARPA funding or whatever other source of funding as expeditiously as humanly possible. And I do plan to drill down into this during the DOT hearing in an excruciating level of detail, as well as the ARPA hearing, to better understand and be assured that, again, we're spending those dollars as expediently as possible to make sure that our employees have a safe place to work out of. Okay. All right. Appreciate it, guys. Thank you. Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And also, I think I was one of the ones who asked for a longer hearing on capital budget, so thanks for accommodating. I appreciate it. I have a couple of questions. One is about the highway user revenues. Super
Yes.
excited that this council supported a resolution to make sure that the General Assembly gave us more money in HUR, and that did happen, starting in 2024.
Right.
I think it's to the tune of $50 million additional dollars, which is
Substantial.
not perfect, but it's certainly going to be helpful. Is the process for figuring, so with that frame, you have all this deferred maintenance, you have all of the, list of all the things that need to be done. And so is that sort of the list that folks will go? Are you going to be working with DOT on the allocation of those funds based on the deferred maintenance and the scores and all of that you have? Because mostly the scores are not just the buildings, but they're also the bridges and things like that, right? So.
Yeah, they have a different scoring system for the horizontal assets, but the way it should work, right, is if you have extra money, you go into the next fiscal year and take
Right.
that year's priorities. So, for example, in a year where there are extra general funds, we theoretically already know how to spend it. There's already a backlog that's written down and prioritized. That said, things change, and hopefully they don't change radically or drastically, because the capital budget's a long-term investment.
Right.
But the extra money will, transportation will rethink their priorities, I think, and it'll be based on not just the extra money next year, but for the next 4 years.
4 years, right.
They'll try to think through what can we get done
Yeah.
with this extra money, and hopefully that becomes permanent, at least at that
We're
level.
working on it.
Right. So yeah, it could be a game changer. It really could be, and they could become braver. They could take on things that they might be afraid to take on now. They could be more ambitious. They could speed things up. Right now, your district, Greenmount Avenue, is a perfect example. I mean, we've probably done a dozen streetscape projects in the last 20 years. In the last 5, we've done one, and we spread that out over 5 years,
was
right? I mean, that adds cost and time and cost to the local businesses and everything else. So it might also change the way we work a little bit. But yeah, I mean, there's a new team in DOT. They haven't had the experience of this amount of money for a while. So I think it's a little bit of both.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I think it's important that they go through the list of, deferred maintenance, et cetera, but also think, what are some other priorities that, fit, like the extremely long list of traffic calming requests that I have in my district, for instance, and I think all of my
700
other-
last I heard was 700.
Oh, it's ridiculous. It's, so anyway, and I'm hoping that we get that, some of that as well. Okay, thanks. That's definitely something I want to continue to monitor and work with. The second question I had was related to, I was glad to see in the detail, because I had participated in the capital budget overview with the Planning Commission. I was happy to see that a little under $2 million was dedicated to the 35th and Hill and flooding area, which is a match. It was a required match for the state money. So now we have close to $7-8 million to work with. Coming up in the next couple of weeks, DPW is going to be announcing officially the solution to that particular issue after a very long and intense study. And I say whenever they're before us how much I appreciate that they spent so much time and energy on that. The solution is going to be like $20 million, $25 million. And so that's a new thing coming, because now we are emphasizing, and I think in Councilman Burnett's district it's the same, where they're working on a solution there. So I bring that up to say it wasn't in the 6-year capital budget, okay?
Right.
So how do we then make sure that my residents aren't waiting 6 years, because we might need to put it in at the back of the line, knowing that we have all these other challenges? How do you normally handle that kind of thing where now it's a priority to get it done? I'm not going to get the $20 million all in 1 year, got it. But, and it may not all be city money. We're going to work hard to get state money and federal money, and that's, but so just as an example, how does that work when something new comes in and that wasn't part of that 6-year cycle?
Well, we went over how we prioritize things early, and
Yeah.
and a couple items would be triggered by that. One is if it's required as a match for state or federal funding, that would raise it up on the list. And another is if it's a safety issue, that would typically go to the very top of the list. So that's your short answer. Your long answer is something has to be cut to fund that, to fund our
Dr. Ryan,
portion.
I think you're.
And I want to add that this is in the current 6-year capital budget with stormwater utility funds, so it's not competing with a lot of the other needs that Chris enumerated earlier for city general funds. It would be funded from the utility.
Oh, that's right. I forgot that they had decided to get that 2 million from the utility, and
From
not
the stormwater, yeah.
Okay, okay.
Sure.
So that is one, source also, so it doesn't compete with the rest of it. So, okay, thanks for
It
that.
wouldn't compete for general funds or general obligation bonds, probably.
Right,
Yeah.
right. But yeah, so that was helpful to kind of see, when there is another priority that comes up that wasn't in the original 6-year budget, how that would be handled, so.
Yeah, unfortunately, if it's a general fund and that's your most strategic, most limited pot of money, something else would have to be cut to, and that could apply if you're a general funds are from the operating budget. So when there are things funded, capital objects funded from the general fund, something's cut on the operating side or not being paid for on the operating side.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Councilwoman. Councilman Stokes?
Director, how you doing? One question is, will there be additional funds for home repairs for our seniors, for roofing repairs and heating? I know sometimes it kind of run out, and we have a lot of seniors that are on a fixed income, and they can't afford, roofs with the prices of wood and everything going up. It really makes it very hard for them, and heating systems are already expensive. So do you have funds there, and will you be adding additional funds maybe from Arpa, because there's a lot of seniors who really have that problem throughout the city?
So I'm going to refer you to, you have the electronic version, pages 32 and 33 are the HCD capital budgets. And they're showing a potential cost of $626 million in their
What is potential
overall
cost?
Page 32.
What is potential cost?
It's in volume 1 or volume 2.
What
I
they
know-
estimate the
I know, but you say
backlog, or
I don't know how much that
we'll
is.
say eligible costs.
Okay.
And then in the capital budget, they are basically applying about $3 million towards home repair costs out of that $626 million. Now, I will say, I don't know the actual number, but that is an item in their ARPA request.
So out of the 600 million, you said only 3 million is
About
in for
3
repair.
million out of the capital
Wow.
budget, and then there's an
Is
additional
that it?
amount, the
3
ARPA.
million out of
Yep.
600 million? Wow, okay. My next question is, you talked about doing assessments on some of the city-owned buildings.
Yes, yes, sir.
So my question is, I have a building in my district that I can't tell when last time they did assessment. Now, the roof is $300,000. The back part of the roof is collapsing. So when you talk about assessing the buildings, how often do you do that? Because there's no way a world a building have a kind of roof repair like that all of a sudden. Is because there has been some neglect in assessing some of these city-owned buildings, and it's actually at the Oliver Center, and a lot of programs are in there. So now they're saying, well, you got mold, you have a roof that's a problem. So my concern is, how often do we assess our city buildings? Do we wait till now they deteriorate and then say, oh, can't put the money in there, it costs too much money? I got 2 schools, Madison Square getting tore down, Rutland get tore down. They set forever So now they're going to tear them down. When somebody want to purchase and do something with it, it's too late because we let them sit idle too long and people break in, steal the pipes, everything out of there. So how often
Yes.
do we assess our city-owned buildings so we don't be telling the community, oh, it costs too much money because nobody put money back into the particular building?
John Lloyd's our asset manager, can respond to that.
Yes, DGS goes in and assesses their portfolio every 5 years, or rather they contract every 5 years to have their portfolio assessed. That's not to say that they'll be making repairs on that cycle, but that is the assessment cycle.
I'll add something, Councilman. Last year was not a good capital budget year, as you may remember, and most of DGS's submissions, practically all of them, were for roof repair. Like that's when you're really down, pushed against the wall, that's what you're going to do is roof repair to prevent future problems, just like the ones you just mentioned.
Well, when you talk about roof repairs and you talk about that kind of money, it's more like it was ignored. Because there's no way that that kind of roof need to be put on that building, because if you do it every 5 years, you would have known that you had to do something with that particular building. So every 5 years wasn't actually done to that particular building, because it's virtually impossible for one part of the roof collapse and the rest of the roof got to spend $300,000. That is not a 5-year assessment.
Do you have the address of the building or the name of the building?
Yeah, could you, Councilman, if you could send us that, we'll follow up on that particular building.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Chairman, I just got word from DGS. So the trailers that you were referencing on the impoundment lot are actually being repaired. The repairs are expected to be complete in July.
Thank you.
Yep, just wanted to make sure I corrected.
No, I appreciate you getting on it. I still do want to follow up on that when we get
Sure.
when we get the DOT folks in, as well as DGS. Real quick, I'll get to you in 1 second, Councilman. Stokes, you had mentioned, what was the building or facility?
It's actually the Oliver multipurpose building, but that particular building for that kind of work, and I understand you do 5-year assessments.
Yes.
That must have did it every 15 years, because that building been neglected. And now we're talking about tearing it down, and the people that have their programs and they're upset because they say you want to tear it down, they don't have nowhere else to go. The problem is it's not a safe building. It's not a healthy building. When you got mold and everything in there and asbestos, they don't want to leave. But I was just using an example is if you're doing assessment every 5 years, it's no way in the world that the back of the building is collapsing and the roof costs $300,000. There are pipes in the basement leaking with buckets of water. So when you talk about 5 years, that's way past 5 years for that kind of that building to be in that kind of condition.
So I just want to make sure, though, because the director said he was going to follow up on your, but I wanted to just clarify, was it a specific building or just in general? The what?
1400 East Federal
What was the name of it again? Sorry.
Oliver Multipurpose Center, 1400 East
Got
Federal
it.
Street.
So Nate and Nina and team, just want to make sure everyone was on the same page on that. Councilman Conway. Thank you, Councilman Stokes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've just got two quick questions. Are there plans this year or for future years to begin incorporating the city's net zero requirements by 2045 into the planning process here?
Could you say that again, please?
Are there plans to incorporate the net zero goals that we set as a city into the capital budget process, realizing we're talking about roofs, we're talking about insulation, we're talking about energy efficiency and otherwise? Have we begun thinking about what that means to this process yet?
No, that's a very good question. I would, so your question would, I would primarily apply to DGS and DOT, I believe, maybe also DPW. And while there is a general environmental sieve for looking at, when I went through the criteria, it's not specific to that. So that might be something we want to look at in the future.
Yeah, that'd be really helpful, and I think I don't know that this needs to be necessarily a formal request because it seems that we're still formulating what that may look like. But I'd be very curious to see what that looks like going forward.
Thank you.
The other question I have, and you brought this up in the midst of your presentation, was regarding zero waste and regarding the solid waste for the city and the incinerator. Can you remind me again when does our current contract with the Wheelabrator end?
Oh, I believe the contract was extended for 10 years, and we may be a year and a half into that.
Yeah, that was like 2019 or so, or 2020.
Yeah, I don't know the exact date, actually.
So we have
DPW knows that exact date.
Oh, I'm sure they do. They better.
Right. And our Office of Sustainability would know it also.
I asked that question because tying to my last question, as we think about where we'll be in the next 8 years, have we begun thinking about what steps we'll need to take in order to successfully get ourselves off of the incinerator and what that could mean to the capital budget? These are big questions, I know.
I would say that with there are 8 agencies participating in the capital budget, and with 7 of them, I know what the light at the end of the tunnel looks like. Like with HUR funding you were talking about earlier, we know that if we had $160 million of capital in DOT, they could maintain the city. Like that can become the goal. It won't pay for Highway to Nowhere, Hamburger Street Bridge, but it will maintain the city. We don't quite have that. So the exception to that is the Bureau of Solid Waste. We don't quite know what it will cost and how we would do it at this stage. I would like to say we'll be back here next year with a much better idea of what that looks like. But we don't have it now. We know we're budgeting for what is in essence a temporary landfill expansion, right? It's not long-term. We're budgeting for transfer stations, both truck and rail. We're budgeting for yards, which may or may not need to be expanded or moved, but we don't have the total picture yet.
I'd be really interested to see. I had an opportunity to, my whole team actually go out and visit a couple of composting operations and see what we could have here. And also, if we didn't actually do it here, if we instead sent our trash somewhere else and paid someone else instead of burning it here in Baltimore City, there are a number of ways I think we can go about that. But I think to your point, we need to do some deep thinking about what the costs are over the long term and begin planning that out very soon, because 2021 or whatever it is when that contract ends, will be here 2031 or 2030. That'll be here very soon, and I want to make sure that we begin taking those steps today so that we're not trying to sprint in the last 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman, can you real quickly restate your request from the first one?
The request would be in its simplest terms, trying to understand what steps or what options we have to get us toward stepping off of the incinerator. I think there are a number of ways to get there, but yeah, if we have any sort of way of thinking about that, I'm pretty open to what that looks like. I just want to make sure that we're having that discussion early so that we're not reacting in 5 years from now.
And are you looking for, hang on one second, Bob, are you looking for something in writing on that, or was that just more of a discussion topic?
More of a discussion. I think if you do have anything, any thought that could be helpful for us to think through with you, I'd be more than happy to engage in that conversation.
Yeah, I can comment on that. So we had started to think about this a little bit last year with DPW. The idea would be if you don't incinerate, you have to dispose of the waste some way. And one thing to just be honest about is, yeah, if we don't incinerate, one of the options is trucking or taking the waste somewhere else. That's not exactly a great environmental answer either, right? So when we looked at this incineration, it's very cost effective, and I know that there are environmental impacts of that, but from our perspective, it is very cost effective because you're burning and shrinking material, which means it takes up much less space when it gets to the landfill. So we had started to look at the kind of cost per ton, so to speak, of disposal for a lot of different options. I just want to, say that incineration is one of the most cost-effective ways to do it, and the other options might be more expensive, and they actually might be more environmentally harmful. So we're not anywhere close to completing that, but we did start looking at that last year, and I can definitely follow up with DPW and see where they are on that. But that's the way we think of it, is just, if I've got a ton of trash, what's the cheapest and most environmentally sensitive combined way to kind of get rid of it, if that simplifies it for you.
I can appreciate that. It's certainly going to be easier to burn it. I realize that. I think the question is, and I think this is where the capital conversation comes in as well, when we start looking at other opportunities for whether it's composting or whatever systems we need to have in place in order to allow that to take some portion of our trash away. We need to have those discussions probably sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and the composting's a good example. I know we talked last year to the consultant that was doing the solid waste, I forget what they call kind of their long-term plan. I'm sorry?
Less Waste, Better Baltimore.
Plan.
Yes.
And composting is another one that if there's not a lot of material, it was, does it make sense to build our own facility, or does it make sense to tap into, have a way to dispose and go somewhere else where there's already a facility in place where we might just pay a fee. So those are the kind of things we were kind of grappling with. It's complicated stuff, so it's not just simple finance work that you have to layer on the environmental impact of all those things. But we did start looking at it. It's definitely something that we have an interest in, and DPW does as well.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate you guys at least engaging me in the conversation. Of course, this was I put forward a bill, it seems like forever ago now, to begin thinking about operationally what this might look like for us. That bill didn't go anywhere, but hopefully we're not going to miss the opportunity to have that conversation. And so as we think about sort of from the capital perspective, the things that need to be in play in order for us to, in some way, shape, or form, pull us back and get off of the incinerator. Certainly, we don't want to just assume that 10 years from now we're still going to be on there, because if that is the case, we will definitely be there.
Yeah, if I could offer, the Office of Sustainability is within the planning department, and many of these waste reduction strategies involve behavior change, which you all will be intimately involved with, as will our Office of Sustainability. So I hope we can contribute to that discussion.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Councilwoman Porter.
Thank you. Yeah, and so following up on Councilman Conway's question about composting, one of the main issues that we are facing down in District 10 is kind of like we have the space in the area. It's just necessarily building the infrastructure and dedicating the infrastructure to the community. And so, again, have you all thought about ways in Baltimore City that we can kind of add on to facilities, make a small facility to kind of really rev us up for those types of initiatives that Councilman and I, we both did the Zero Waste Commission bill, and so some of the operational ways that we can do in small increments, that we before we get there, we have some sort of operational plan.
Right, that's a good question. Less waste, whatever the solid waste plan is called.
Yeah, it didn't explicitly say it in there, and so that's why I'm asking about the specific community.
I think they refer to mini MRFs in there.
Yeah.
And the challenge with a mini MRF is a couple don't work economically. Like, you have to set up a system of mini MRFs. And I would imagine that to be an early effort by the Bureau of Solid Waste that would have a capital component, but we haven't seen that yet. Again, we have to look at the system, because you got to sell the stuff, right? It's not just build a facility.
Yeah, it's not.
Mini MRF is something that has come up.
Yeah, and I think more importantly, the Councilman saying the need is there. We already have, there are a bunch of CBOs that are already doing this and operationalizing this. It's really building upon the city's promise to work with them and operationalize this before this, contract comes up again. And so, similar to what the councilman was saying, I would love to work with you all on that operationalizing of this plan and really making sure that we have community involvement and community stakeholders that, as was represented when, organizations like the South Baltimore Community Land Trust came to the table before.
If I could add one more thing, I mean, just to take a step ahead, sort of a little bit beyond the Bureau of Solid Waste, is that we need the markets. We have to almost prime the pump for the markets for these materials. So we have to start that now to be able to do a mini MRF 5 years down the road, or 3 years, or whatever.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
I was just going to add, I've had an opportunity to talk to a handful of people in surrounding counties, and I think everyone is thinking about this issue. So I think if we did work with the surrounding counties, we could be that option, and it could be something where it could be a money generator for Baltimore City in a effective way. But I think we need to ask those questions and start putting those things in motion, because it's not, we can't just build a big composting facility and just day one get it going. It takes a lot more to get there. So I think that's where these conversations need to happen.
And then on top of that, just to add to that, there are specific data points from our hospital systems that are already kind of using this metric of composting, of waste generation, waste diversion, implementing, waste diversion and composting food scraps program from our school system. So we do have existing data points with, community-based organizations in District 10 that have already been doing this work. It's just now the effect of scaling it up and really kind of instituting it on a citywide level. And like you said, that is a behavior change. And again, as a practitioner, sooner rather than later for any type of behavior change that is going to happen. So.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, before I go into my question, just adding myself to this list, I have a bill to around deconstruction rather than demolition that I'll be introducing. So because 40% of our waste stream into the incinerator is compost, but 40% is also the construction debris. So, and that's consistent with the housing work that I've been doing, because if we're going to demolish all these buildings, we might as well deconstruct and not just demolish them. So if I could add myself to that list. And also, I've already started talking with folks in the region also about a bottle deposit, which we have to do at the state level for obvious reasons. So anyway, my question is around slide, just pull it up here. Is that slide 26, where we're talking about public works and utilities? There's revenue loans, which is basically, we're paying into that with our water bills. And then county grants. My understanding from last year's budget hearings was the county, there's a complicated relationship between the county and the city, because we do supply water to many residents in the county, in some of the surrounding counties. They set their rates. We do not set those rates. There is supposed to be a reimbursement for our costs from the counties to the city. And I think each year we wonder whether we're actually getting what we're supposed to be getting from them. But then if we also, if it's this is a capital question as well, we then, if there is a pipe broken or whatever on the county side, or no, in general, they are supposed to, because our pipes also service their consumers, that they end up paying half of the cost for those repairs. So first of all, is that correct? And second of all, this $47 million from county grants seems super low to me in terms of how the formula works.
Yeah, I don't believe it's half. I think we want to defer this to DPW and maybe we'll come back and respond, but
Okay.
It's a proportion of the project cost based on how much of it serves the county versus city
Okay.
customers. But we'll get something to you in writing from DPW.
Yeah, that would be helpful, and I realize it probably is a DPW question, but I was wondering also if your office, because you're monitoring the Capitol, you know, also has these questions, like, wait a second, this doesn't seem right. You know, are you also asking these questions too? Because they're still, in addition to this whole, they set their rates, then have to reimburse us, we don't actually know whether we're getting the right amount, then there's the Capitol side.
We definitely ask these questions, and again, it's not half. It's based on kind of a proportion of the project that serves customers in the county versus the city. So we are asking these and talking to DPW about that.
Right. Okay, thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilman Dorsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chris, just a basic question about the presentation of the capital budget. Every item begins with allocated or appropriate to date, and many of those are very big numbers, and we're adding, you know, 2 million onto some, I don't know, lifetime of continuous accrual of investment under a certain category. What is the life of that scope of approved to date or allocated to date? And does it include or does it subtract money already spent? I'm wondering about the utility of presenting that number and how that could be more informative.
You want to try that one? I think we can, Sarah will.
So the appropriations to date is probably most useful for projects that have a clear beginning, middle, and end, because then you can see the total that's appropriated for the project and then what is projected additionally needed. Our software system also records that information for ongoing projects that are listed year after year, and it's probably not particularly useful to your point for those. But it does include appropriations to date, including what's been spent as well.
Including what's been spent.
Correct. It's just
yeah. I'm wondering in some of these cases, like if it wouldn't be more helpful to have it less what's been spent, or like a separate column for less what's been spent. I don't know. I'd be interested to see how well money is going out as what's coming in. Does that make sense? I'm sorry, I had to restart my computer. It's giving me some trouble. I had it up in front of me a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
And there are some that it's massive, massive numbers of approved
right. If you
to
look
date.
at demolition, for example, that's in the capital budget every year.
Or like huge amounts of money going to the city school system.
Right, systemic projects for the school system. That's just going to be a line item that repeats every year, and so it's just adding on. So it's not I agree, it's not particularly useful for those. It is more useful if you look at an individual school and you look at
like
the
you said,
renovation for, you know, that particular school.
Right, or things where you're banking towards some total allocation that you need in order to achieve a project.
Correct.
Even in those cases, I guess I might be interested in seeing what's been spent. I don't know.
Yeah, we don't, maybe with Workday we'll be able to get there. Our current system, I'm not sure if we have that capacity right now.
That, as in the actual spending of the money, is it making its way back?
It doesn't tie into the same system right now that we use for the budgeting process.
Is that something, can somebody speak to that? Is that something that Workday will create capacity for?
I'm not sure offhand. We'd have to go back and look at that module specifically.
I will say we have an antiquated system in the CIP division. It's not that modern.
Okay, well, I guess I'm making it known. I'd like to see that in the future. I think it'd be helpful. My other question is equally general. You ever hear any agencies say, don't bother giving us any more money for that? We'd have too much difficulty spending it.
Councilman, I'll answer this question for the agency. It's like the time that I purchased a flat screen TV and I was too concerned that the TV was going to be too big for my room. And he said, "Sir, what I can tell you is that I've never had a person return a TV because it was too big. They've returned them because they're too small, but not because they're too big."
As the person who literally said that to hundreds of customers in my days of selling and installing TVs in people's houses, literally making that argument, I can understand that. However, I'm pretty sure that DOT has such operational challenges that they basically can't build more infrastructure than what we're giving them money for, even though we have a huge need to catch up. For example, I think that we're like basically 6 years behind on our planned development of the separated lane and low stress bicycle networks, and basically meaning that we can't even bother planning new bicycle infrastructure in the city because it wouldn't matter, because anything that we build this year was supposed to have been built 6 years ago. When we hear and understand and know things like that are need to execute things that we've long ago planned, is basically not possible because of operational problems. What is the feedback that we're giving to agencies, telling them you need to get your operational house in order so that we can fund you properly with capital?
Right. This is a really good question and really well timed. And you will see, and I guess this week in the budget presentation, the Director of Recreation and Parks wrestling with this very issue, and it's magnified if the funding source is ARPA funding, which has a deadline to it. So I think DOT is a good example too, that the agency directors are wrestling with this. They're looking at the balance between their capital side and their operating side. And ARPA will be a challenging moment because it won't be a permanent influx of funding. So they will have to be able to gear up for short-term expenditure with a tight deadline, without any guarantee that that funding will continue after the ARPA deadline. It's a great question, but I can assure you every director wrestles with it, and the CAO may have more to say about that.
This is the exact reason why, because this challenge is going to be exacerbated by the moment we're in terms of the amount of funding coming our way to improve our infrastructure. And this is exactly why we had the conversation we did earlier this morning around an infrastructure office, not to do the work of the agency, but to make sure that our administrative systems, those barriers to actually getting a project through procurement, through BOE, and into a contractor's hands, that we are helping shepherd the funding through is absolutely top of mind. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It kind of does, but we keep having. So maybe last year I kind of finally got an opportunity to stop fighting for DOT to add some engineering positions to their office, because even the number of engineering positions that they have is probably a half to maybe even as little as 1/3 of what they should have for a city this size, in terms of the funded positions. And my sense is that maybe half or fewer of those positions are actually funded right now, and that this is a huge barrier to us being able to even finish planning projects that should have come to like 100% planning phase years ago. This is the last year of the separated bike lane network plan. So literally everything in that plan should be finished this year, and we're like years and years out from finishing many of the projects. We've known this is a problem for a while, and I don't know what I'm getting at here, except that I feel like the capital budget process and the planning department should be making it a priority to execute on some of these things and saying you have to build the things that you planned to build, and if you don't have, and then there's got to be some pushback to make them build out what they need operationally in order to be able to do that.
The challenge with putting planning in a position where they are ensuring implementation, I think, muddies the water to some extent. They are in a position where they're advocating and working with agencies to make the best possible decisions around the limited capital resources we have. And I think part of, kind of my responsibility in the mayor's is to make sure that we are taking the budget that they shepherd, and then we are working with agencies to get the money out the door and to make sure that those projects are delivered on time and on budget, as we discussed earlier this morning. It is a real concern, and our capacity over the next few years to be able to do this successfully will make the difference in terms of our leveraging the moment in terms of infrastructure dollars and some of the recovery dollars, or not, and being in a position where we're just not as competitive and not using the moment in time to truly improve infrastructure in a way that we could.
I'm going to tie this back to my previous question then about the need for us to be able to understand money that has gone out the door versus money that's allocated. Can planning gather information on actually spent dollars of allocated funds for bicycle infrastructure?
Yes. Yeah, we can do that.
I'd like to see, I'm pretty sure that the separated lane plan was a 6-year plan, so, and this is the last year of it, so I'd like to see what money has gone unspent but allocated over the last 5 years.
Okay. Yeah, I do, this particular issue I'm aware of because, as you may know, the first couple of years there was very little progress on that plan, and the Planning Commission now holds a meeting every year with Department of Transportation specifically around the bicycle master plan and the implementation rate of it. So they were very behind there for a while because they weren't staffed up. But
My recollection, my understanding is that this year at that meeting, they literally said, don't bother giving us more money because we don't even have the capacity to spend.
Because they're behind.
And that's not where we should be as a city.
I will say, in my current job, one quote I remember from President Obama was, "There is no such thing as a shovel-ready project." And I understand that now, because if you don't think you're going to have the money, you don't design for it. So when someone comes along and says, oh, here's $5 million, what are you going to do with it? That's not necessarily an easy question to answer. You really have to think through, how do you get that project designed, cost it out, bid out, and all that, when you weren't planning to do that.
Thank you.
Councilman Stokes?
Just a request, Director Ryan. We talked about building, actually doing an assessment on buildings instead of it being every 5 years. To me, and then the building that deteriorated so much. My request is, can we possibly change that to every 2 years? Because our buildings are our assets, and if we continue to only check them on every 5 years, we're gonna have more buildings that's gonna be in bad shape, or we gotta raise them. So that's just a request, and is that possible?
Well, I would defer to the Director of General Services for an answer. They developed the contract with a vendor to do that. I will say that, to their credit, the other agencies are adopting that same system. So, for example, Recreation and Park are buying that same vendor. Hi.
Okay, we can get an answer
The
now.
Director of General Services.
Deputy CAO, you can take that off.
You'll have to do with me. Berke is not here. Today's his first day. Good afternoon, everyone. Chichinya Ganesh, Deputy City Administrator. Just wanted to address your question about conducting assessments on the buildings on a biannual basis. The activity of assessing these buildings is a very in-depth one. They're looking at everything from the basement to the roof, the systems, the windows, the structural integrity, the roofs, the doors, are they hanging off their hinges? So everything with both interior and exterior of the building is assessed when we get around to doing the facility condition assessment. So one should not be needed every 2 years once we get to a building, because what the assessment is able to tell us is knowing the useful life of a system, the useful life of a roof, useful life of a boiler, useful life of lighting systems. Based on when they were installed or last overhauled, they can project out when they will next need to be replaced or how far overdue they are. And so with that understanding, agencies are then able to do a better job of identifying which buildings need the highest priority in capital investment and what systems within that building need it. So to Director Ryer's comment earlier about DGS's CIP request predominantly being roofs for FY23, that's because a lot of the facility condition assessments indicate that a lot of the roofs are way past their useful life. And so that's how we determine where we need to do 15 roofs with the same amount of money that we can use to do one overall full building renovation in one building. So trying to spread that money out as best we can, as broadly as we can. As Director Ryer also said, so DGS started doing these facility condition assessments several years ago. More agencies are now investing the money that's required to get these consultants out to do these, and so over time we'll have more and more of the city's inventory of assets that have this FCI rating attached to them.
So Director Chichi, you saying that you can't do it every 5 years?
That it should not need to be done every 5 years.
Well, I mean, I don't know, the gentleman said it's every 5 years over there. So my question is, and that's why the Oliver Center is a mess now.
I'm sorry?
That's why the Oliver Multipurpose Center is a mess now. Because they didn't probably do that every 5 years. They might have did that every 10 years.
And we have not gotten around to every building. So Mr. Lloyd is right that they should be done every 5, but because we can only afford to get to a certain number of square feet in a year based on the cost to the consultant, we have to prioritize which buildings or which subset of buildings we are going to be able to get FCAs conducted on. And so we are not fully done with assessing all our facilities, and so that's why we may not have an FCI on the Oliver Multipurpose Center.
Real quick, I'm not,
Yes,
it was probably not done before you came on board, but we can't continue waiting every 5 years. It just don't make sense when you got buildings there. You got programs in that building. So if that building have to come down, those youth programs and after-school programs, they have absolutely nowhere else to go because we totally ignore a city-owned building because we did it every 5 years. In that particular building, they probably did every 15, I don't know. But it's just the building is in horrible shape. So it was just a suggestion of 5 years. I know what you're saying. But if we let a building sit for 5 years and then do assessment, and they would just do it every 2 years, you will find out exactly what needs to be done, and the cost would probably be a lot less, and then you wouldn't be in a position like the multipurpose center is. It's a horrible building. I mean, if you put money in there, but the problem now is the community want the building because they're saying nobody, put no money back into the building. They don't have nowhere else to go. So I thought maybe, from 5 to 2, because we would not be having this conversation.
Just out of curiosity, what was the total life cycle to get through all of our facilities on that assessment?
How much money can we throw at it? It really is a function of how much DGS in the past has had in their budget, because it costs several million to do. I think it's about 100,000 square feet, or I don't remember exactly what the amount is, but we do as many. DGS does as many as they can afford in any fiscal year.
And how is that? I think you guys have already answered this, but more directly, how is that list of buildings prioritized?
So we wanted to start with primarily the downtown buildings that house multiple agencies and that we knew already had systems that were failing. And then I believe we went to the public safety buildings next and did the firehouses and the police stations. Aside from that, I can't tell you right now, but I can certainly get back to you on how the prioritization was done.
Yeah, if you could get back to us on
Yes, sir.
with more detail, that would be helpful.
Can I just make a suggestion?
Yes, sir.
I understand the downtown buildings, but there are community buildings and communities that communities use. If you just focus in on downtown, that's probably why the Oliver Center is in bad shape, because we focus on downtown and not focus on the assets that we have in our neighborhood that communities are using. So that sounds real disturbing that you're just going to start at downtown.
Started, but the plan has always been to broaden it and do as many as we can.
All those buildings downtown, Director, it would be a long time before we get to neighborhoods.
I can get back to you with the list on when we intend to get to them and what the order of prioritization is.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Deputy CAO. Have you received a request from Rec and Parks for the construction of a new recreation center in the 5th Council District?
Say that,
Have you received a request or inquiries from Baltimore City Rec and Parks regarding a new recreation center in the 5th Council District in Northwest? Ms. Aher? Just, Mike.
Did you say 5th?
5th,
Yes.
yes.
I don't believe we have. Yeah. I don't believe we have, no.
Okay, just, I was asked to ask that question, and I was curious because I know my colleague has referenced that very frequently and consistently, but more so with Rec and Parks. I'm just curious.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, very good. Colleagues, any other questions? All right, we are in recess with 8 minutes to spare until 3 p.m. Thank you.